A lot of times people use tactics to try to get you off your game. It's not even like they want to achieve what they're demanding, but they use it tactically to throw you off, to get you triggered, to get you emotional, to get you not listening, to get you not being creative, all the things that you want to do well in a negotiation. Like, they actually do it to try to get the negotiating advantage on you that is way beyond that particular issue. So if you let them do that, you lose.
Welcome to the Fueling Deals Podcast, the podcast that teaches how to accelerate your business growth through all types of deals. It's time to fuel up, so buckle in with your host, Corey Kupfer.
There are only two ways to grow your business: organically through sales and marketing and providing great products and services, and inorganically through deals. Too many companies focus only on the first way, organic growth. Welcome to the podcast, which will help accelerate your business growth inorganically. My guests are a huge variety of deal makers and experts on all types of deals who have personal experience that can help you grow, get clear, learn best practices, and avoid mistakes. We discuss everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. Today is a solo cast, and if you've been following, as many of you have, the solo casts recently, I've been going through some of the major points from my Authentic Negotiating book that was published 3 years ago and fortunately became an Amazon bestseller, and I've got a lot of great feedback on. And I wanted to give you that content, or at least a summary of some of that content through the podcast here, in case you hadn't had an opportunity to read the book. If you go back, I started that on the November 20th episode that was released on November 20th, where we talked about clarity, detachment, and equilibrium, which is my fundamental framework to be a great negotiator. On later ones, we talked about the top 6 reasons negotiations fail, the top 5 steps to becoming a great negotiator. And so, if you want to go back and check out a few of those, I think 3 out of the last 4 podcasts were on the book. And we're up to now what is covered in chapter 5 of Authentic Negotiating, which is inauthentic negotiating techniques and how to handle them. So many of you have heard me say that I'm not a fan on focusing first on negotiating techniques, even the good ones, because the deeper inner work that I talk about in terms of clarity, detachment, and equilibrium, and not coming into a negotiation from a place of fear or ego or upset or anger or scarcity or all those things is way, way more important than even the good negotiating tactics and techniques that you may learn. So, and then the good ones you want to layer on top of that deeper work you want to do, because no tactic or technique is going to help you if you go into a negotiation from a place of desperation, for example. But those, you might add on, you should learn them and add them on later, the good tactics. But there's so many inauthentic tactics out there that you don't want to be doing, because you're going to lose your credibility. They don't work with great negotiators. I mean, they may work with somebody who's, not sophisticated, but, we all listen. Do you want to be that kind of person? You get a reputation out there. It's not the way you want to do business. And as you go up the chain, they're not going to work with anybody who's a good negotiator. In fact, those of us who negotiate for a living, can see those a mile away, can call them out and know how to deal with them. So that's really what I want to spend time on here. I'm not going to spend time on the inauthentic negotiating tactics for you to learn how to use them, but I want you to learn how to, because other people are going to use them at times, against you or in a negotiation with you, because either they're, not great people. And frankly, if you really determine that, you shouldn't be doing a deal with them. Or frankly, they might be actually, decent people, and they could be good business partners or joint venture partners, strategic alliance partners, whatever it is. But they've been trained poorly in negotiating. And you want to try to distinguish that and maybe not hold them against it totally, but you need to know how to deal with those situations. Or you might be in a situation where you're forced to be in a negotiation with a tough party on the other side. Maybe it's regarding a dispute and somebody you're never going to do business with again, and they use some of these tactics, and you need to learn how to deal with them. So let's identify some of them. Now, there's a huge list that I have on my website where, I when I do talks, sometimes I scroll through screens and screens of these things, because it's amazing how many of these are out there. But we take some examples in the book, and I'll talk about some of those and give you some ideas on how to handle those individually, and then some thoughts basically on how to handle any authentic negotiating or inauthentic negotiating technique, sort of some blanket rules and approaches that you can take. So what are some of them? So there's something that we call the empty promise, which is basically where somebody, promises something that they know they're not going to fulfill in the end. Classic example, before due diligence, somebody comes in and offers you, let's say you're looking to sell your company, for example, and they offer you a much higher number than the number that everybody else is offering. And you're like, wow, that sounds great. But they may be going into that knowing that they're then going to go through a due diligence process, and they're going to find issues with your company, with your financials, with your people, with missing signed contracts, whatever it is, and they know they're gonna knock that price down. Whereas other people may be offering a more realistic price, so you got to watch out for that. That's an example of it. Another example where it happens often on the other way is when a contractor comes in and underbids everybody. Right, you see this all the time, whether it's commercial, construction, or whether it's renovating your home, and somebody underbids the job. Now, some of those guys underbid the job because they're just not great business people, and they don't anticipate everything that's involved. That certainly happens. Sort of, honest mistakes, poor business. But there are some who underbid the job, knowing that they're going to be asking you for more money and have you in a leverage position because they're in the middle of the job and you don't want to have to go change contractors, and they're going to say, there's all these unexpected things that came up, which, by the way, can happen in contracting for real. I remember when I bought a house up on Lake Joseph, we went to put in a fireplace, and it turned out that the whole back wall of the house was rotted out because there was no flashing on the decks, and that was real. But sometimes and the contractor deserved to be paid more for that because there was truly more work. But sometimes they'll find stuff, make stuff up, or just they go in knowing that they're going to try to get you later, and that's all in that context of empty promises. So, there's a question on how you deal with that, right? Well, the first thing is you got to stay calm. You have to connect to that CDE that I talk about in the prior podcast and in the book, the clarity, detachment, and equilibrium. Because if you get upset, angry, thrown off, etc., and by the way, you can do that when you hear about it, but don't go into the negotiation. Get yourself recentered in a place where you're not triggered, and you can look at it objectively and see whether they knew that all along, and then make a decision on what you want to do on that, right? And by the way, if you see it up front, you want to test whether it's an empty promise up front. If somebody comes in much higher in the buying the business scenario or much lower in the contractor scenario, you want to start asking questions on why they're so different than other people, and try to determine what the due diligence process is going to be, or what the change order process is going to be if they find the things are different. Another tactic is called the big fish. And that's where, this is, talked about a lot of times, where you have a difference in size or scale, a scope of one party in the negotiation, to the other. So let's say, you have an innovative entrepreneur who's come up with a great product and goes into a big company, to try to do a deal with them on it. Well, then, the company may make an offer that is, that's not fair, let's say, for what you're offering. And, the either stated or sometimes implied threat is, listen, we're a big fish. We can figure this out on our own. We can crush you in the marketplace. So, you better take what we're going to give you, or else you'll end up with nothing. This it's an intimidation tactic. There's some reality in some situations, but usually there are other big players or other players in the space. You may not be able to compete with that on your own, but there are other people to potentially do deals with. And frankly, there are situations where, people have turned down those kind of big deals, especially in the tech industry and things like that, and gone on to grow significant companies. Now, that's not the everyday case, but it does happen. So, what I always say is, listen, remember, even when you're the small fish, you have leverage. Now, why do I say that? Does it mean you have huge leverage? No, but there's a fundamental concept that I always talk about, and that is nobody has no leverage. Some people will say, I'm small, they're huge, I have no leverage. It's never the case. Why? Because you're there, you're at the table. If they're talking to you, they want to do something with you. You have some leverage. Again, it might not be the hugest leverage in the world, but it's never no leverage. You wouldn't be, if you had no leverage, you wouldn't be at the table. They wouldn't be interested. So keep in mind that you always have, leverage. And and you want to stay in that composition. You want to make the case, for why you have value, and you want to get that clarity that I talk about in the CDE process. And clarity, detachment, and equilibrium. The first big thing is clarity, right? I've talked about this in the past, and you need to get clarity on exactly. It's so much more even important in that situation where you got that big fish on exactly what's acceptable to you and not. Because one of the biggest leverage points, and one of the biggest points that actually makes you more attractive to these bigger companies, is if you're actually very clear and firm from a place of clarity, not rigidity, right? From a place of clarity on what's acceptable to you or not. And you're willing to walk away, from that calm, clear place as opposed from upset, anger, and ego. So that's the big fish. The next one is what we call nibbling. And nibbling is the situation where there's always another ask. So like you think you've negotiated out all of the terms of the deal, and suddenly they come up with 3 new things. And then you're getting closer to closing, and there's another 2 items, there's another 1 item. And they haven't put all the cards on the table purposely, because they want you to trade things off thinking that you're going to get the deal done and then ask for more, later. And it's called nibbling because it's like they do it in little bites, a little extra. And it could drive you crazy. And frankly, sometimes it's very malicious. And sometimes things do come up. And if it's, a change here or there and they justify it properly, that's probably not nibbling. But there are people who just do that consistently, and you can tell. They're just pushing for every little additional thing they can get, and they didn't ask for it up front because they wanted you to make the trade-offs up front and give up what you want, or what you were willing to give up in exchange for other things before they even ask for the additional things, so that they can then try to lock in your position. And that's tough, right? So one of the things when you get a sense that somebody's nibbling is that you want to basically put it on the line. I mean, you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily useful to accuse them of nibbling, but you can say, listen, we negotiated out what we thought were all the terms. You've now put 2 new terms on the table. Before we discuss these, I need to know that there's going to be nothing else after this. I need to know that this is the entire universe of everything you want, because we can't do this, in piecemeal. And then you address those items. Now, it's easy to get upset about that and just look to reject them because you don't think it's fair. But you look at it objectively. If those were things that in your clarity process, if you did that work that I always ask you to do, you would have given on anyway, well, then maybe you let go, of the upset around nibbling, and you say, hey, listen, what's the difference? I was willing to do this anyway. Or, what you may do is ask for, concession from them. Listen, we negotiated these 12 things on each side, but we had a deal. You come back with these 2 new things, we'll consider those, but we need this additional thing, or we need to change that, and do a trade-off there. But again, the thing is to stay in that calm place, to evaluate whether it's something that you were willing to give anyway, and not let the tactic throw you off. The next one is something called quivering quill, and it's akin to nibbling in that it is when somebody asks for something additional after you thought the negotiation was done. But when we call it quivering quill, it's like nibbling is a little here, again. Quivering quill is this idea of it's at the closing table. So it goes back to the old term of a quill, which is what you used to sign with, right? The old what we now use pens. And you're at the signing table, and the other side says, "Hey, not going to close the deal unless we get this one last concession." And the reason it's quivering quill is because you're nervous, you want to get the deal done. You're at the moment, there's stress, and now they're claiming in a strongest case scenario that they're going to back out unless you agree to this one additional concession. Well, again, you're in that same position. That one can be even more frustrating and easy to, get you angered. And listen, you want to take into account, depending upon what kind of deal you're doing, whether you want to do business with a person who does that to you, right? And sometimes, frankly, I mean, this is one that I've definitely called out at times, and this is going to relate to an overall piece of advice I'm going to give you on all these tactics. Where I've said, listen, this last minute concession stuff doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my client. And, it just, if this is the way you're going to be, I don't know, if we want to be in business with you. That's one approach. But listen, you may need the deal, want the deal. You may otherwise think it's a good partner for other reasons. You may be in a negotiation that you don't have a lot of, options on, whatever the reasons you may want to stay in there. In which case, again, you want to take that step back, look at what that final request was, look at it against your clarity process on all the objectives you got clear on, and see whether it's beyond what you should agree to or not. If it's not, then, just because they brought it up that way, maybe it's still okay to agree. You can also ask for a corresponding concession or compromise on it. There's a million things you can do there. But again, don't let it throw you off. I mean, a lot of these things are done to try to throw you off, and the best thing you can do is not get thrown off. Then the next one is limited authority. That comes up a lot. I don't have the authority to make the decision. I got to go up to the board, to my boss, to somebody. And, from a tactical point of view, a lot of the trainings will tell you, I'll try to determine, the authority of somebody in advance. And if they have limited authority, insist on having the person with authority in the room from day one. And you know what? That's decent advice at times, but a lot of times you can't do that, and you can't apply a blanket standard. There are a lot of companies, for example, large companies, where you can't get, it's not the way they work, right? They have lower level people handle negotiations up to a certain point, and then there are certain issues that get elevated, and the boss or the boss's boss, whoever it is not going to sit in the room with you and negotiate the 25 things that you were able to do with the junior person. They're going to come in for the 2 or 3 or 5 things that need to be negotiated later. So it's not necessarily the concept of limited authority might be accurate. It actually might be authentic, but there are times when people use it as an excuse, right? In other words, they don't want to take the heat of saying no in the room, so they blame a supposed limited, other authority, which may or may not exist even, or maybe the person exists, but they don't really need their approval. Or they blame some fictitious board or whatever it is, or, I don't have the authority to go beyond my budget, so I can only pay you this. And while some of those times may be true, others maybe not. And frankly, their limited authority shouldn't affect you. In other words, if they say on the budget example, well, either the deal's going to work for you or not. If they don't have the budget for it, they're not the client. They're not the partner to do the deal for you. If you haven't hit, you're not a penny less than. Go back to that talk that I gave in the clarity part, price. So, so you just don't want to engage these games. So let's talk a little bit about, because the problem with the tactic and counter tactic game is that it does get manipulative. It does get inauthentic. It becomes time consuming. You're not especially with any kind of ongoing relationship, which a lot of business negotiations are, business partnerships, joint ventures, strategic alliance, any kind of contract deal, distribution, marketing, you name it, affiliate deal. Those are all ongoing relationships. And if you get into this game playing back and forth up front, I always say a negotiation is only the start or the continuation of a relationship. And the relationship's more important than the negotiation. And if you leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, that's not a great way to start. So what you want to do is, stay in that place, do some of the things I talked about. And there are 2 general things that you can do on any tactic, whether it's these 4 or 5 I talked about, or the 100 others that I list on my in my resources page on CoreyKupfer.com. There's 2 fundamental things you can do on any tactic. The first one is to, like I said, stay calm. Just not let it affect you. A lot of times people use tactics to try to get you off your game. It's not even like they want to achieve what they're demanding, but they use it tactically to throw you off, to get you triggered, to get you emotional, to get you not listening, to get you not being creative, all the things that you want to do well in a negotiation. Like, they actually do it to try to get the negotiating advantage on you that is way beyond that particular issue. So if you let them do that, you lose essentially, right? Or, you're not going to do as well. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. So that's the one I've been alluding to a lot, and really, do that prep and don't let them do that. So the other one, though, which is a really interesting way to counteract any of these, is to name it. Is to actually name the tactic. And by the way, here's the key thing: don't name it out of upset, anger, or whatever, or gotcha, because then they've got you. They know they've affected you. But I sort of sometimes will give a little chuckle, right? Because I know, and I'll say, "Hey, you guys trying to play good cop, bad cop on me?" Or the limited authority gambit. I love it. So just you let them know that you know what they're doing, that it's not affecting you, not from a place of upset, but just to sort of be bemused by it. That works a lot of times because they don't know what to do when you've sort of called them out in a funny way. Because basically, you basically said, "Hey, I'm on to you. I know what you're doing. Come on, let's get real." Right? And that works a lot of times. A couple other things I want to talk about here before we finish this little solo cast, talking about the inauthentic negotiating techniques, and I might have mentioned one of these in a prior podcast, but it's worth repeating it if I did, which is this conversation of tells. I'm trying to read people, and I don't have any problem with that. It's not what I teach. I actually had a prior episode on with the body language expert, Greg Williams. I don't have the episode number in front of me, but you can look it up, where he's a negotiating guy who talks a lot about reading body language and things like that. And that could be useful if you want to learn that. I tend to sort of, frankly, trust my intuitive instinct by being really, really present and by listening and by watching. And I get intuitive feelings, but there are techniques to learn how to do that stuff. I have no problem with those. But what I do, and I mentioned it on that episode, what I do have an issue with is the trainings that try to teach you how not to give off a tell. All right, don't look up here because it means this. Don't. And if you're in a negotiation trying to focus on what not to do with your body, with your, with your face, with your, there's microfacial expressions that you can't control, you're in trouble. All right, already. What you need to do is go do the inner work to get out of that place of fear, scarcity, upset, whatever. So, don't worry about trying to mask your tells. Do the inner work to not have tells that are showing that you're in fear or upset. And the final thing I want to talk about here, that I talk about in that chapter in the book, is about this concept of mirroring. Now, mirroring means a lot of things, so you don't want to confuse what I'm saying. So like, for example, there's a negotiating guy who I know who's got a interesting book, more on the tactical side, but he's actually one of the people where I like, he's talking about good tactical stuff. Chris Voss, who has a book called Never Split the Difference. And, when Chris says mirroring, he's talking about the concept of mirroring where you repeat the last few words of somebody's sentence. They say something and then you repeat it back to them because that shows that you've heard them and you're listening and you've acknowledged them. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this body mirroring concept that some of the negotiating courses teach, where this concept of, to build rapport, if the other person leans in, you should lean in. If they cross their legs this way, you should mirror them and cross their legs. So if they cross their right leg over their left, you would mirror them by crossing your left over your right, so you'd be in the same position. I'm actually, for me, that's totally inauthentic as a tactic, right? Because what happens is when you see people who've been trained in these things, and it's kind of actually funny to me who negotiates that way, because you can tell when they're doing it because they're thinking about it. So there's this hesitation moment between when they, this person, look, they lean back and cross their legs, I should lean back and cross my legs, right? It just doesn't feel natural. Now, here's the truth. Here's the funny part. The funny part is if actually you just worked on really being present and listening and being connected to the other person, you'll naturally mirror them in that way. Like it's a natural thing if you're really connected with somebody in a conversation, really listening, if they lean in, you'll probably lean in. But the problem is when you do it tactically, it's inauthentic. And that's an inauthentic approach. And I've watched, when I see other people do that, right, I can call it out. I know what they're doing. I know what courses they took that told them to do that. And, and most of the time I'm not going to, call it out because there's no benefit in it. They're not trying to, it's not like calling out a good cop, bad cop or the limited authority or, the nibbling thing, because, they're not, they're actually trying, because those courses try to teach you that, oh, that's the way you help build rapport. So they're actually probably coming from a positive place trying to do it. And even if they're not, what's the harm? But, but you want to be aware of that if somebody's doing that, because that just shows you that they're trying to build rapport with you, but they're doing it from an inauthentic place. So those are some of the inauthentic techniques, and you want to know them and learn some of the other ones enough because you'll come across them. Unfortunately, there's still bad negotiators out there. And frankly, there's still a number of trainings out there that teach some of this stuff. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, there was an article, I won't say which publication, it was online, one of the major business publications, and there was an article there, and then they actually had like 5 tips to be a great negotiator or something like that. And the first one was, I forget what they called it. I wish I remember, because they had a name for it that was, and I've talked about it before. I'm just drawing a blank on what the name of this, tactic was, but it was just like, it was so bad. They basically said that you should, no matter what somebody offers you, right? They're going to buy your company for X. They're going to, price you goods at X. They're going to charge you X for distribution, whatever it is, right? They throw out a number that you need to be shocked. You need to, no matter what the number is, you make believe you're shocked, that you're amazed, like it can't be that high. And, it actually pains me. It really just pains me when I see this kind of advice in major publications, because, that is so inauthentic, right? And, if you think any good negotiator can't read when you're pulling a tactic like that, you lose credibility. That's what, you lose credibility, you lose trust. And again, in many business negotiations, they are the start of a new relationship or the continuation of an existing relationship. And the last thing you want to do is lose trust and credibility by pulling some sort of crazy, tactic that somebody has taught you in some course or a book or magazine. So with that, I appreciate all of you listening. If you have any questions on this stuff, definitely listen, reach out. I'd love you to, when we post the episodes of the podcast, we do social media posts with them. You can hit me up on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. And definitely reach out with questions. Would love to hear your input and comments, and would appreciate you rating the podcast. That would be amazing. I appreciate all the listeners. And until next time, thank you for being here. Thank you, Fueling Deals listeners, for tuning in. Remember, there's only one difference between companies that grow inorganically and those that don't. And it's unrelated to size, amount of capital, or any other factor other than that the owners and executives of companies that do deals make a decision to do deals, and then they take action. Well, it's time to refuel. So until next week, Corey Kupfer signing out.
Thank you again for tuning in. Be sure to leave Fueling Deals a rating and review on iTunes and Google. Check out all our episodes at fuelingdeals.com to find out more resources to accelerate your business growth.